Ever wake up in the middle of winter and feel like spring suddenly showed up overnight? That dramatic warm-up is often caused by Chinook winds. Chinooks are warm, dry, and sometimes very strong winds that blow down the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. As moist Pacific air is forced up the mountains, it cools and drops its moisture as rain or snow on the west side. Once that air crosses the peak, it sinks on the east side and warms rapidly through compression. That process can cause temperatures to jump 20 to 40 degrees, sometimes in just minutes. It's why Chinooks are sometimes nicknamed snow eaters. They can melt or evaporate deep snowpack fast, occasionally leading to slush or even flooding. Winds can be intense, with gusts topping 60 to 100 miles per hour in extreme cases. As the air warms, it also dries out, sending humidity levels plummeting. That dry air can increase fire danger even in the middle of winter. A visual clue is the Chinook arc, a long stationary cloud band hugging the mountains. Some people even feel the effects physically, developing headaches from rapid pressure changes. Chinooks are most common in the winter and early spring across Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and southern Alberta, Canada. So if winter suddenly feels like it hits a fast forward, chances are a Chinook wind event is at work.